When we think about the education, we often think about the outcomes, employability, and disciplines, but pay far less attention on something that is very consequential, a structure that goes behind to shape how we learn to think, how we learn to collaborate, and even influence at maybe local level or the global scale. In today's world where there are so many challenges from the climate change to the technological disruptions and even societal inequality, they don't respect disciplinary boundaries, and yet our educational system still does. So the real question becomes, what happens when we design creative education not as a hierarchy of subject, but as an infrastructure for resilience, legitimacy, and long-term leadership? This episode is about how creative education structure shapes society and global power, and what it takes to redesign the infrastructures and the institutions so that they can meet the challenges that we are entering in, and the world that we want to leave behind. My today's guest is Rathna Ramanathan, Provost of Central St. Martin's and Executive Dean for the Global Affairs at the University of the Arts, London. Rathna is one of the leading thinkers and institutional leaders working at the intersection of design, culture, and global education, and spent decades reimagining how creative education can serve society with purpose. In this conversation, we will go deep into invisible work of institutional design, the tensions and the trade-offs behind the structural change, and why the future of influence may depend more on how we educate than what we teach. Thank you so much, Ratna, for joining us today. And we want to know what your thoughts are and all about that you have spent your years to designing. I am Saili Wagmare, host of Influences of Change. Thank you for joining us. Would you like to introduce yourself?
Of course. Yeah. Hi, Sally. It's great to be here and great to be a part of a podcast that's featuring lots of things that aren't normally featured in the mainstream. I'm Rathna Ramanathan, and as you've introduced me, I'm head of Central St. Martin's, and I work at University of the Arts, London. I come from India, and I'm a designer, so a lot of leadership and change for me is also about the possibilities of design. It's great to be a part of a podcast that's about creativity, that's about, women and also change, three topics that we don't talk about very much, really. So I'm really happy to be here for all of those reasons.
Thank you so much. And it's great to have you here. To start, as we established, the system needs redesign. So I want to know more on the foundation level. What assumptions about the education, especially creative education, are quietly no longer working, and where the traditional disciplinary hierarchies fall short? Because I also saw that you were working on redesigning and rethinking of creative education.
Mhm.
Yeah, we'd love to hear about that.
What we're doing at Central St. Martin's, where I'm at, which is we organized as courses, programs, and schools. And earlier we didn't have schools. So I think that to think of schools provide like a function, whether that's organizational or allow students to mix as a community and bring together different disciplines, for example. But what I wanted to do was, partly because I'm an international academic, I've come to the UK from India and benefited by being in a very dialogic, discursive kind of culture to be relevant to where our students are coming from, wherever they come from, whether that's a different place or a different culture or a different context or economic context or disciplinary context. So I went back because I'm both like work in history as well as in design. I went back into the archives and looked at what was consistent about Central St. Martin's throughout. And what was central was, one, a link to industry. Yeah, there was always a sense of practice and giving to economy and industry. There was always a mix between critical thinking and skills, technical skills. There was always a mix between that. And there was always a sort of interdisciplinarity. So you could find a fine art student in a textile studio, or, you could find a fashion student kind of working with product as an example. And I think, so we've like launched 3 schools of thought essentially, and they are where the disciplines sit in these schools in a way, and the schools are culture, systems, and material, CSM, and within them sit design practices, fashion, jewelry, textiles, material, So each, I suppose, is not just a subject area. It's a way of asking a question, really, about the relevance of creative education and design and how it could be useful. So you're looking at art within a cultural context as an example. But also art can be material and art can be systems. So that's quite
Yeah.
nice that students can find themselves in a course, in a school, but also in a college in that sense. You asked me about what's no longer working. And I think that we're seeing such rapid change. So I think that normally you would find change in a lifetime of a human. So let's say you're studying a BA and you might find that you will go into a career and that
Yeah.
career will be stable and it might lead you to other things, but you'll go up in that way. You will kind of find your career path through it that way. I don't think we have stable careers anymore. I think the optionality of careers and the pace of change, whether that's, climate, like you mentioned, whether that's technology, or even peace and conflict, like, things that are happening right now when we're speaking in the Middle East, we wouldn't have even thought of happening 3 weeks ago. So I think preparing students for quite an uncertain future needs context. So creative education gives you that context because as a designer and artist, you're always doing something for somebody else.
Yeah.
So creativity has a great superpower is that it helps you think of other people. The second thing is that creativity can help you imagine. So, creativity, the core of creativity is imagination. And the power to imagine new futures, the power to imagine new contexts, because the boundaries that we've had so far in the world are starting to break down. So how do
Yeah.
we kind of function? And I think COVID did this for us very well. It showed the power of that imagination and how we connect with each other. I suppose the last thing I'd say that creativity does and creative education does is we're always iterating. You're always testing something with an audience and you're constantly improving something in conversation and dialogue. And there are very few professions that have that. So I think creative education has a great part to play that's not just about soft skills, but really about collaboration with science or technology or enterprise or heritage or culture. It can become a thing that actually like absorbs and, is able to recreate that. So that's what we've set out to do. And we're really interested in how other people are doing it. We're also interested in what our students are, how they start to, absorb it and own it and where it will kind of go next. And also how we, like you said, you spoke about curriculum earlier. So it's
Yeah.
also about how we organize ourselves, how we debate curriculum, as well, where they go out in terms of graduate outcomes, how they could be employed in different industries and have different jobs throughout their lifetime, really, after being students with us.
That's so interesting how you mention a whole creativity and the structure that you have created, especially a school of thought and how it's solving the real world problem. Could you take us deep dive and maybe give us examples? Like if you have any students or any
Mm-hmm.
solution that has like through this school of thoughts has solved
Mm-hmm.
the real problems, maybe across the world, because we
Mm-hmm.
have Central St. Martin has students from the across the world.
So I think it's well, we have famous alumni, so I won't mention the famous alumni because
Yeah.
it's often easy to focus on famous alumni and say, look how they shaped this fashion industry or that. So I
Yeah.
won't do that, but I will focus on our students and our current students in the work. Schools are new for us, so they're just about 2 years new in that sense. And I think, like I said, I dug into the soul, heart and soul of CSM, to see this. So I would say the schools of thought exemplify what already was happening in the college and is
Mhm.
starting to kind of try and create a platform for that. So I point to perhaps two things. We have an exhibition ongoing right now that's curated by students, and it's called A Common Thread. And in that common thread is a loom. It's basically a loom that's about maybe 1.5 floors or two floors high, that is created by fashion students, curation students, and architectural students. And it really is about creating something together as an audience. In terms of what the change is, I think it's sort of like there's several pieces of work there. One piece of work is by a student who's from China who's collaborating on a piece of wool garment. But the design is 1,500 years old, the stitching and the process of all of that. So it's taking something about human expression that we have known for a long time and making that part of the contemporary imagination as well. That, we have know how to resolve these problems. Let's connect with our ancestors in a way that helps us prepare for the future because they may have faced very similar things. The other thing I would say is we run courses that are called Material Futures or Biodesign. And people are really looking in labs here. And it's odd, isn't it, for a creative college to have a lab, but we have labs and they looking at sustainable materials. So when you walk around our showcase, you will see that there's a climate sensitivity. They're looking at materials that have less impact on the world, whether that's printing or whether that's textile or, we're really looking at how can we design things that has less of an impact. And then finally, I suppose it's about more longer term thinking. I think
Yeah.
we have very short term thinking. So we're really getting our students to think about, well, what would happen 30, 40 years from now? What are the challenges that the earth might be facing? Is it climate? Is it weather? Is it food? Is it, so really think about some really hard challenges, I suppose, in that. So the curriculum has to prepare them for asking the right questions in that way. Last example is perhaps a fine art example where students are bringing their own culture. So for example, you will know that, there is a so-called untouchable caste in India, or the Dalits, who are allowed or not allowed to have ceremonial things like Hindu ceremonies, for example. And the student has made a piece of work that allows them to and gives them the permission to, that everybody has a human right to bury their loved ones. So it's challenging some real kind of cultural stereotypes or beliefs that we have through artistic and design practice.
That's so awesome. Like in all those three examples you mentioned, there is a climate change, there is a cultural
Yes,
difference, collaboration between the different countries, like students from the different countries to create
that's right.
something that is
Yeah.
sustainable. So it seems like it's actually a school of thought. So thank you. But when we come to we have such amazing impact that we create as an institution, but art is still it's seen
Mhm.
as
Yeah.
prioritized every. So as you are also head of global affairs, so how do you make sure that you put, when it comes to structure and the prioritization, that you have those external ties and then you maintain that to make sure that art is always a priority or at least push through it? Or
Yeah.
what are the challenges that you face?
So I think that always art has been, so I think that one is championing it and
Mhm.
understanding it and always sort of that. And I think so putting our students first, showcasing their work would be the first way that you show it, is to ensure that the students who have come to us to learn, because in a way, so that they have their work is understood. And people start to, so I think that's one thing. I think that art cannot stay by itself. So I think our art is eminently collaborative and community based. So that for example, we host something called the Camden Arts School Biennale, and that is basically primary schools in Camden, the borough that we're in, the students making art. This conversation has to start very early and it has to be
Yeah.
supported very early from a child stage all the way so that young people do think that art is a career that they can have as well. And that is a viable career that can also, that you could have a livelihood for it, but you could also find kind of it's a sort of pleasure from it, or it satisfies you. I think the other thing is that it is a work in progress, because I think that, for example, activity, so sports and exercise are good for your well-being, but there are recent research that shows from our colleagues at UCL and everywhere that art is very good for your well-being, that you can go and see art and actually that it is actually good for your health and well-being because of how it makes you feel and the reception of art. So I think that is still a work in progress. Art is so essential to human life, is still a thing in progress. But I think collaborating with other disciplines. So, earlier we spoke about creativity. Creativity is
Yes.
not just about art school, but you find creative scientists, right? You find creative technologists. You find creative
Yeah.
engineers. So I think we sometimes limit what creativity is by these labels of disciplines. But actually, when you think about people like, I don't know, Leonardo da Vinci or, the real they were really prolific and kind of pluralist.
Yeah.
They had a great expanse of things. And that's perhaps why they came to the kind of, to the reasons that they did, or to the kind of discoveries that they did. So I feel that we need to go back full circle into that open disciplinary, but also acknowledge cultural philosophies, because the way we express ourselves as human is so multiple that we shouldn't limit that by having one definition of what is creativity or what is art.
I was talking to one of the students who study at St. Martin as well, and we were talking about the art and like how it's very subjective and how we cannot limit it. And also like we were discussing different people in different courses and how they are exploring it, and even about the history. So I think like whatever we do at a higher level is definitely kind of like drilling down into the student, and which is so amazing to see and like even experiencing it. But like you mentioned the Camden Art Festival or the school as well, initiatives that you are doing, the studies. So what is the like work and the whole structure that goes behind it? What good collaboration looks like within the institutions or the leaders to make sure that it's happening and it's kind of benefiting the society and the students?
So I think it's sort of like, I think with students, it's like Arjun Appadurai talks about curiosity, like he's, and research as curiosity. And I think every human being is curious. Every human being is imaginative. But some of us feel like we have the permission to do that, and some of us don't because we're facing such hard challenges. So I think really for us at University of the Arts London, it's anchoring ourselves in place. The fact that each of our colleges is based in a place so that when students come from wherever they come from, they can trial ideas with communities and learn from that and sort of take it back. So I think it's really allowing that space for that kind of community collaboration or industry collaboration, with partners or with collaboration within themselves to be able to learn from themselves. So I think that for me is sort of like fundamental to education, is that exploration and that experimentation, but that it's real. These are real industry briefs in that sense. I think also that something that you're also talking about is really how education works as infrastructure. And that's very interesting because it is public infrastructure. And I think you're making an argument for that because how the institution is structured, who it brings, what it says to the world is like like an operating system that supports the students and kind of gives that to the students. And then changing the operating system, like putting up schools, then changes everything. So it can bring a potential of what research gets funded, who collaborates with us and is interested, what industries, take us seriously, what, a government might see us being useful for, like the creative industries strategy. And I think, you understand this because you have also have a sabbatical officer experience, is that structural decisions sort of shape what is possible for students. Even if it's invisible, it can create that. And then I think you also really spoke a bit about my other role, is that it connects to global affairs. So it's not just that it happens in London, but that creative education is a huge asset for any organization or any country. So cultural capital really shapes how United Kingdom is perceived or London is perceived through fashion or design or fine art or architecture. So that's kind of, it's live. And any country really can kind of benefit from that. And that, as you say, from your public sector background, it starts to shape the policy dimension there in terms of it moves from an institution like CSM or University of the Arts to kind of a national agenda to then an international agenda. Yeah.
As a like thought leader or even like as ethical leader, when you redesign the whole infrastructure, because you change the curriculum or you change the infrastructure to benefit the future leaders or future students who are going into the society to impact in long term. So what kind of resistance do you think that you may face always? And also like when you face a resistance, what are the values that you are always not willing to give up on?
Okay, that is such a great question. I'll answer it in two ways. So I think that resistance is a good thing because I think for a designer, resistance means something isn't working or it's giving you a message of some kind. So the flow, something about the flow is being resisted. And then it brings up questions, really. So I think when you're bringing change, you've got to really have a clear vision, like a clear design vision that's really open to the intelligence of people within it. So you can't create a hard change. You've got to create a framework for change that allows other people to contribute to it. And that contribution is basically like a design problem, is it, in itself? So designing a college is, for me, a design problem in that sense, because it requires a different kind of leadership, which is it's neither top down, nor is it seeking consensus. It's a design problem that says, everybody, here we go. What do you think? And let's start to shape this together as we're going along. So it's like a conversation, the conversation that does have a framework. Not everything is open, right? So in the first all staff gathering, one of the staff asked me, well, what if we don't have schools? Yeah. And I was like, no, we're going to have schools because they serve a purpose. So I think that's sort of a thing. But I think in the paper that I wrote, I would say that when I say foundations, not hierarchies, it's not a slogan. It's a design principle. Yeah. It's a principle of how we work with each other. I think the hardest part of institutional change isn't the structure. It's earning the trust of the people who have a right to be suspicious about change and to be patient and take them on the journey with you, because they want to see where do they fit in? How can they contribute? Or even like what are they going to gain from it? And to understand, the audiences that you mentioned kind of earlier. And I suppose I really genuinely believe that creative education isn't just a nice to have. It's an infrastructure for how a country can be perceived and what it's capable of imagining. And I feel like the university should lead that. Now, if you ask me about personal resistance and ethics, I would say, and particularly in a global environment, it's becoming very increasingly important. I'd say two things. I think one is that we have college principles that we all live by. So you and I might disagree, but we should find a common ground so that we work constructively rather than destructively. That conflict can be a good thing that can be constructive, because in design, conflict is that you work with criticism all the time and critical feedback rather than, I don't know, go for war, for example, or shut down something. You just think about and reflect and iterate. But personally, there can be a cost to that leadership, because there's Rathna behind the head of college. I'm an Indian graphic designer that's in an international British institution. And with that comes challenge, because of course you're serving a diverse group of people around you. I think is to always check in with yourself and also surround yourself with people a team that have the same values and ethics and the same service and purpose. But no institution should change who you are, because I think that fundamental thing about leadership is that, so I always have 3 words in my back pocket that define me. And if I'm ever conflicted, I go back to the 3 words, and they provide a route for me in terms of thinking that through. Not easily. Sometimes it takes a lot of walking in a park for a long time and reflecting before the answer comes. Sometimes it's a real challenge, because often it's about people and you want to be supportive but firm, about that. But I think I have 3 words that I go back to. And I think you're going to ask me what the 3 words are, so I'm going to try not to say them. But yeah, I think that's what I would say. If anybody else is doing this, that would be my thought. Yeah.
Okay. It would be great if you will tell us those 3 words.
Okay. My 3 words are bold, ethical, and inclusive. And the boldness is not to be afraid of change, but also to speak truth to power, which is hard to do. Ethical is that you always consider the ethics of a situation, that it's equitable to everybody involved rather than equal, because there's equity is a very different thing. And inclusion is, I suppose, the same thing. Is like, think about how it might impact people of different abilities and diversities when you're making change happen or when you're leading. So yeah, I'd say those are my 3 words.
That's so awesome. Like having those 3 words, they actually champion when you are a leader, but it's also very difficult to adhere to, especially when it comes to current dynamic environment. World is changing from every dimension, and you geopolitical disruptions, technological.
100%.
You mentioned inclusivity, that you have so many diverse cultures and things. Institution has such an important role to play at this moment to build up the next generation.
Yeah.
I want to know from you, like how as an institution, you make sure that you have that responsibility at your forefront to make sure that every person who comes from the diverse background or whoever they maybe they feel inclusive.
Yeah.
And does like communication, I'm assuming communication play a really important part in. So how you make sure that the communication that goes out is inclusive? They feel belong there.
Yeah, I think it's hard because I think it's hard. There's so much of, I think that creativity often brings together people who have felt excluded anyway outside, whether that's through school or through an environment. Artistic people are always outsiders in some cases. I suppose to just show that we are also a bunch of outsiders, because we're all practitioners at CSM and at UL. So I think that helps that people have taken that part. I think communication is a work in progress. I think that if you asked our staff, they would say some things are good, some things are not good enough. So we're still in a work in progress, and to understand that we're working at it. But I think, again, that conversation of trust. I think the other thing is visibility as a leader, is to be able to be accessible to staff and students so they can come up and tell you when things aren't working and give you feedback. And I think for me, I did move the college office from the 4th floor to the ground floor so that we could be with the students and with the staff as well in a much more. So we were a bit more kind of open door, I would say. But belonging is hard. And I suppose some of that is also knowing that I was being open about where I come from, and knowing that, everybody comes from a different place, and, so that they could see that it's going to be okay, that it's going to be okay, and that we could give them the means for that. But I think that perhaps where it becomes really hard is that you're saying this, geopolitical tension, a whole bunch of things. Creative education is undervalued. It is a policy failure that creative education is undervalued. It's not just a funding complaint, but the UK has world-leading creative institutions, and we don't have a coherent strategy for leveraging them and bringing them together. And that is a policy failure. I feel like actually we can do this work and we could be resilient in this work, but there is only certain capacity with which we could do that, where we do need frameworks, governmental frameworks to support us in that. Yeah, I think that's sort of and us writing about it is probably important. I think it's also like it's such a kind of hidden, maybe a treasure house, in the sense that AI and creative education, right? There's like so much there that we could make as a distinctive contribution to AI literacy, because it starts from practice, not just policy. So, but I think that is the only thing I would say that makes it much harder from an external point of view, is that sense of belonging gets othered a lot at the moment. Creative education is getting othered quite a lot. And that feels, quite a moment in our country's history here.
Yeah. No, it's very important to have that, because I recently there was like so much going on around the world, even in music, and how art is political somehow. It is creative, but also political, has changed. It has made so many momentums in the history, and even recently. Do you remember from your whole career history that where communication and or the art became a power instead of skill, and how it has championed like well?
Yeah. So that's an interesting question, because I'm going to draw on practice here. I think I have two examples. The BBC radio used to be, when they were great, they had a world service, basically, used to have a BBC Hindi channel, and they were in some of the most rural parts as a radio in India. And the BBC is a very sort of trusted, information provider, that it can be quite balanced in it, but it can bring people together. But their viewership wasn't great in some of the most deprived areas of India, the rural, in the Hindi heartland, as it was called, which is that Jharkhand, deprivation. Somebody that I'd work with in Tara Books, which is the publisher that I work with, a tribal artist by the name, a Gond artist by the name Baju Sham, had made a book called The London Jungle Book, which was his experience of coming to London, rather than the original Jungle Book, which was going, Kipling's Jungle Book. This person contacted us from the BBC to say, seeing the book and saying, would you design the campaign, the roadshow campaign for the BBC? And we did it because the literacy levels, the textual literacy levels were so low in this area. So we communicated through visuals. Baju did the campaign, the Voice of the People campaign, with this giant, and very, very, very simple Hindi that brought people together. Aapke Baat BBC ke saath, which is your news with the BBC, basically. And it drew hundreds and thousands of people, and it raised the BBC radio's viewership by 700,000 people. And the power of that was the art. because it communicated in a way that people understood rather than. So I think the media, the format, the material, the content was entirely, and I was just the designer on it. Baju was the expert on it, and the BBC were guiding us through it. So Baju was the one who was the expert who knew how to communicate to the audience in their own language. And the language was visual. The language was art, gone art. So I think that is power, because it's about bringing people together, and giving people who don't normally have art, or people attend to them because of buying power or economic power, that they were
Yeah.
seen, they were recognized as valuable. And, so it was a great campaign, and it was actually featured quite a lot in different, as an example of how to do something. And I think hats off to the BBC for doing that in that way.
That's such an awesome example. I mean, yeah, I was expecting, but that does show power of creativity. Even art, that is something that resonates with the people from the
Exactly.
places, because we know there are like thousands of languages in the world, and especially when it comes to India, there are so
Yeah.
many cultures and native languages. Understanding that with one language was kind of difficult. So, well done.
Exactly. Yeah. Well done to Baju. It was him really and I think that's it, isn't it? Art can go across cultures visually when you're communicating. You don't need words. So gestures and art can really do that. So sometimes emojis do that, it can go across cultures in a way
Yeah.
that everybody can understand. It can be international in itself. It could be global. So yeah, you're right. Art has the capacity to do that.
You mentioned there were two examples.
So the other example is also about languages. And I think that there is a project called the Murthy Classical Library of India that is a funded project by Rohan Murthy that is really to bring the classicals and translate them in all of India's languages, and offer them as a publication that people can have access to. So I think the worry for me is that if we limit the way that humans communicate, we limit the way in which we describe the world. And for
Yeah.
thousands of years, we have described the world through different languages and customs and rituals. And that is the richness of what we do. So for me, I feel like there is a power in that, as well as bringing that alive, classical traditions or ways in which we used to do something, and bringing that alive to a contemporary imagination for people to access. And so giving people access to knowledge is a really powerful thing. And creativity can do that, or design can do that, or art can do that, or systems can do that. You can make things open source and you can have it available. And that is knowledge. Knowledge becomes then power, to use a sort of cliched phrase. That's, for me, that's what it would look like.
Yeah, no, that's true. Like I started my career in design as well. And then I have had very different path
Yeah.
to where I am. But it did open a path for me to knowledge and understand different things till now. Like even if it's very technical or commercial, I make everything colorful so that I can understand it well. So it does have a very important part in different people's life.
Yeah. Thank you.
And thank you. Going back to on like our institutional structures, and you also mentioned that you make like when you design the whole infrastructure, you also ensure that what outcome or the graduates will go into the industry have some sort of like you design the whole curriculum according to that so that it can benefit real world problems, and also people will contribute into the real world impact. What kind of graduate does world need now, or do you think in your future, and how are you working towards it?
Yeah, I think that the schools of thought really want to attend to this, because I think the kind of graduate that the world needs is someone who is adaptable, who is able to work across disciplines. It's interesting that you spoke about coming from design and moving through your career. I think that's very normal. I think that's a very normal. I don't think that there is a set industry anymore in that sense. So I think the kind of graduate that the world needs is someone who's culturally sensitive, able to work with very different people, is able to be adaptable, so can work very fast paced with different projects, can handle change, if need, but is able to retain the humanness as technology and, has a rapid kind of change. And I think that's why I feel like the creative environment allows you to sort of test that, so that your skills keep you, you get one chance at education. If you're lucky, you get two. But I think that an undergraduate degree really should, coming to university is an expensive thing in the UK, as we know. So it should really set you right for those things. And I think that so that you could flex to whatever life is going to throw at you, through these fundamental kind of skills that are interpersonal, intercultural, but also interdisciplinary. Yeah.
That's awesome. That's for the graduates. But when it comes to institutions, what they must protect as they adopt in this evolving world.
Say that again, Sally.
So for the institutions, as you are
Yeah.
also globally and you've been working in different institutions, you have
Yeah.
worked across the countries. So for institution, when they adopt to the new changes, they adopt to the new infrastructure or the schools structures, what they protect as they adopt.
A practice. I think that for me, the word practice is at the core of what we do. And I think practice is about who you are as a living being, but it's also who you are as a designer or an artist. So I think that if I stopped creativity or stopped a sense of failure or I stopped that experimentation, I would have completely failed. I think that my job is to protect all of those things, and I think previous heads of college would say the same thing, that everybody has been about nurturing that and kind of protecting that. I think that, and that is the soul of creativity, isn't it? I think it's also that you are creative when you feel safe.
Yeah.
So to create a safe environment, and I think to ensure that people feel safe when they come in, so that they can fail, they can try and not feel overly judged by, their trials, I think is, an important aspect. And I suppose to protect the currency of the discipline, to protect creativity in that sense is sort of like it has a place and a position and a contribution in the world, and to ensure that we nurture that and other people understand that and join. So to grow that sense of it. And we're getting people from other disciplines joining us a lot, whether that's law or anthropology. So I think it's quite interesting. We're getting scientists, we're getting anthropologists, people from different backgrounds coming to join us who are interested in it. So that's also good.
That's nice. And as we're moving towards the end, we want to know, what is your cautious optimism? We talked about all about the challenges, problems, or what we are trying to solve and how we built everything. But what is your cautious optimism that you think, yeah, this is awesome and this is working and that's why I want to do it?
I think I feel that. Interesting. I think I'm not cautious. I think I'm just optimistic because I'm a head of college and I have the privilege of being with students and people who are thinking and optimistically and hopeful and dynamic. So for me, I feel like it's a great privilege for me to just feed off that energy as a head of college. So we're talking about tough things, but for me, that optimism really comes from like students like you were once, and that bring that energy and that hope, that say actually we could positively make a difference here, and we could do something that is. And then every day that I walk into this college I see something that is funny or hilarious, or the TikTok dancers, or and for me that's so human. So I think it's what makes us human that keeps me optimistic, maybe
That's
not
so true.
cautious, but definitely optimistic. I'm like, yeah.
No, that is so true. Like people see you and they have this, because you are optimistic, you give that positive vibe to everybody, like people across you around, like who are walking students. One of my friends did say that Rathna was there as well. Like she was walking and smiling, and it just makes so much difference to like see person at such a high authority, just
That's
being
good to know.
normal. And being a normal person, that means this is a safe space. And it is like actually a leader does give a lot of out for people to feel safe and like feel that this is their place to thrive and do anything they want to do. So
That's
thank you for
amazing.
that.
Thank you for that. That's feedback I'm going to take, because you've caused me to also reflect on the things that are important to our community and to me as well. So I really appreciate the opportunity to do that, Sally.
Thank you. And one last question. What conversation do you hope that work comes next?
That the people who join you in these conversations, whether they're listeners or whether they're the people that you're interviewing, really are. I think that we need more leading through change. I think that there is that. I think that we need more positive, optimistic, constructive ways of leading through change. And I think that so I hope that this conversation, will bring those people and bring us together and collect us, because we certainly need it and our students certainly need it as well. And for me, I feel like always these conversations cause reflection. So It's the end of term. So, we'll all be sort of winding down in a little bit before we wind up again for the very busy summer term. So I'm going to take this away as reflections in terms of what else should I be doing in that sense in relation of that championing that creativity and spreading that message.
Thank you. I'll try my best to open up those conversations with other members as well who I'll be interviewing, and hopefully our listeners too as well for end of term. And I hope Showcase goes well because it's very important for the institute and the students.
Yes,
Thank you.
it really is. It's a great time. And I look forward to seeing you, at Showcase. Do come and visit, and it'll be nice to kind of walk around and see all of the work that we've been, that we're here for, really. Thank you so
Yeah,
much, Siley. It's been a great chat, and I've really enjoyed it, and I appreciate the opportunity.
thank you. Thank you so much for tuning in with Influences of Change. If you found this conversation valuable, please do follow and subscribe across your preferred platforms to stay updated on upcoming episodes and insightful stories. Thank you.